Majesty, Dr. Hyman, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. As co-chair of the Kennedy School's Environment and Ecology Professional Interest Council, I join my colleagues Mike Jung and Paul Rubio in extending a very warm welcome to you all for joining us in our celebrations of Earth Day. We are especially honored to have Her Majesty Queen Noor as our guest speaker, whom I grew to respect and admire tremendously over the 7 years that I spent working with her. Her strength and honesty, eternal optimism, and an almost unshakable faith in people have been an inspiration and a guiding light in my own life. It was Her Majesty's long-standing leadership and commitment to environmental issues, which began during her own student days, that rekindled my interest in studying the links between environment and development, and ultimately brought me here to the Kennedy School. The Environment and Ecology Professional Interest Council, EPIC, at the Kennedy School serves as a meeting ground for students interested in environmental issues from a policy perspective. Through debates, environmental campaigns, lectures, discussions, EPIC helps make Harvard more environmentally sustainable. We are working to integrate environmental issues into other policy disciplines at the Kennedy School, highlight the interdisciplinary nature of environmental studies, and improve awareness of professional opportunities for students in the field. Our activities over the past year included a distinguished forum speaker. We joined other students and local environmental organizations for a full-day cleanup of the banks of the Charles River. We initiated a campaign for Earth Day to buy carbon credits. We worked with the school student government to organize a debate on the Kyoto Protocol, and worked closely with other student groups at Harvard to help coordinate the Student Day at last week's symposium, Environment and Development Towards Sustainability in the 21st Century. We would like to wish our successors, Adriana Hochberg, Muge Dolan, and Michelle Russo, the best of luck in the year ahead. We would also like to extend very special thanks to Professor Henry Lee, whose door was always open to us and who has helped us with our budget, provided invaluable advice and insights, and nudged things forward whenever we got stuck. We are truly grateful. I'll now give the floor to Dr. Hyman. Dr. Stephen Hyman became Harvard's 4th provost in December 2001, after serving as director of the National Institute of Mental Health. He's a leading scholar at the intersection of molecular neurobiology and psychiatry, and brings to Harvard a commitment to organizational development, cross-faculty academic collaboration, and the enrichment of the Harvard community. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna, for your gracious introduction and for your commitment to environmental issues. It was wonderful to hear what you and your colleagues are up to for the university. Harvard has a very strong commitment to the environment and to the issue of sustainable development, and this is well evidenced by the university's Center on the Environment. This center, which is one of the co-sponsors of tonight's event, brings together faculty and students from every school at Harvard to work on the broad issues relating to the quality of the global environment. Indeed, one of the great joys of being at a place like Harvard is that we have the opportunity to bring together such diverse scholars as earth and planetary scientists, with people interested in specific environmental health issues, with individuals interested in policy, ethics, law, and together through the University Center on the Environment, I believe they can make an important contribution. One of the driving forces behind the center, since we're here at the Kennedy School, has been the work of Kennedy School faculty led by Professors Bill Clark, John Holdren, and Robert Stavins. This school has been one of the key participants in the university's research and outreach on issues ranging from climate change policy to global sustainability. The school is building bridges across disciplines. Indeed, that's one of the key issues for the Kennedy School, reaching out, linking science and health communities across continents, and developing linkages to programs and research centers in every region of the world. Now, it is my very great honor to introduce Queen Noor to you this evening. Her Majesty's address comes at the culmination of our university-wide symposium sponsored by the initiative and the Center on the Environment, which was entitled Environment and Development Towards Sustainability in the 21st Century. Her Majesty will speak on environmental security and development in a talk entitled Towards a New Definition of Security. We look forward to hearing her insights on this very important subject. After Her Majesty speaks, she's kindly agreed to take questions from the audience. Since 1978, Queen Noor has played a major role in promoting international exchange and understanding on issues related to the Middle East. In Jordan, she initiated, directed, and sponsored projects and activities to address specific national development needs in areas including education, women and children's welfare, human rights, conflict resolution, community development, environmental and architectural conservation, culture, and planning. She is actively involved with international and United Nations organizations that address global challenges in these fields. The King Hussein Foundation, which is chaired by Queen Noor, was established by royal decree in 1999. The foundation is a national and international nonprofit, non-governmental organization dedicated to give meaningful expression to the late King's humanitarian vision with a legacy with emphasis on democracy and peace, education and leadership, environment and health. She is president of the United World Colleges, a network of 10 equal opportunity international colleges around the world, which foster cross-cultural understanding and global peace, as well as being chair of the International Advisory Committee for the United Nations University International Leadership Academy. This is the first global leadership training facility, as well as the first UN institution to be initiated and established in the Middle East. Queen Noor is honorary chair of the McGill Middle East Program in Civil Society and Peace Building, which brings together Jordanians, Israelis, and Palestinians to improve the living condition of the region's poor. Queen Noor has assumed an advocacy role in the international campaign to ban landmines and is also an advisor to the global initiative Women Waging Peace. Please join me in welcoming our honored guest.
Thank you very much. I'm here today in response to invitations that I received from a number of different organizations at the university, students and others concerned with environment and a range of issues that came together at this particular time, not too far from Earth Day, and were an irresistible magnet, if you will, for me back to a school that I admire greatly, and an opportunity to spend time with students here that is even a greater privilege. I want to mention particularly EPIC and the Environmental and Natural Resource Program at the Kennedy School, the Arab Student Societies, and in fact, students of other societies that welcomed me earlier at a reception, and the Harvard Foundation, which sponsored that reception and has welcomed me to Cambridge today. I'm here, as you've heard, to talk about new concepts of security. And actually, this seems an ideal place to do it. As James Madison said, learned institutions ought to be favorite objects with every free people. They throw that light over the public mind, which is the best security against crafty and dangerous encroachment on the public liberty. Although, come to think of it, he may have had a different learned institution in mind. He and I share Princeton as our alma mater. Still, since my theme is expanding definitions, perhaps President Madison wouldn't object to extending the title of learned institution to Harvard, just for the sake of this argument. But it is good to be back in New England, a region that has always hosted revolutionary ideas, and some of my own, well, at least my activist tendencies were nourished not too far from here in Concord, Massachusetts. I've had long-standing affection and respect for this extraordinarily learned and inquiring community. I visited and spoken here several times over the past 25 years in the course of my efforts to bridge the almost insurmountable gulf of ignorance and distrust between East and West. Unfortunately, it seems as if these visits have always coincided with new crises at home. And this time is no different, as you all know. Or indeed, if anything, it is worse. Events in the Middle East since 2000 and in the United States and Afghanistan since the following September have placed the suggested topic for my remarks tonight, a 21st century definition of security, if you will, at the forefront of most people's minds. Until that 2nd September, the end of the Cold War had lulled this country and many European nations into a false sense of security. Some intellectuals toyed with the idea of the end of history, while an unprecedented run of prosperity and growth convinced the more material-minded that global market capitalism had won, and all was right and safe with the world. Meanwhile, thinkers as varied as Germaine Greer, Helen Keller, Martin Luther King had long derided the very concept of security as a myth, the refuge of the lazy, the complacent, and the anesthetized. Security, if it existed at all, they seemed to be saying, was valued only by those who clung to the status quo and the most shallow definitions of success, whereas true reality was to be found in change. Last September, the 11th, Americans and their allies on both sides of the debate realized how real, precious, and fragile their security was when it was shattered. Now, it appears that America is reverting in large measure to a dangerously simplistic view of security, a good versus evil, us versus them, with us or against us definition of security as strength. These two opposing points of view, security as myth and security as military might, are equally wrong-headed. Security is elusive. It has always been elusive in my part of the world, but it is not illusory. It can exist, but it must be radically redefined. In the 21st century, security does not rest so much in protecting borders from terrorist, military, or market aggression, but more in providing a stable environment for all citizens to participate fully in personal, economic, and political life. And that term environment is pivotal. Environmental security, a policy field that links conservation issues to security threats, logically includes the physical environment of our planet, the cultural, social, and political environment of its peoples, and the economic environment of globalization. As the technologies and strategies of globalization ever widen their reach, local communities are becoming and feeling more marginalized than ever before. Global agendas, be they political, economic, or environmental, are widely perceived to favor the haves at the expense of the have-nots. Some cultures and beliefs that are being ignored are turning inward to preserve their identities, becoming radicalized, and resorting to extremism, even violence, to get their message heard. This disregard of local needs by huge multinational corporations and the perception by many that their traditional social structures and cultural norms are being eroded and replaced by new and often alien values and practices, and the unprecedented pace of global change have given rise to a backlash against globalization, from WTO protesters to the ever-increasing number of political and ethnic separatist groups, and even, and most horrifying of all, to the ultimately self-destroying phenomenon of terrorism. Although its extreme methods cannot be condoned, its motives are often linked to environments of inequality that breed alienation and despair. For many nations today, from Africa to the Balkans to Indonesia and elsewhere, security concerns center less on boundaries and external military might and more on internal conflict stemming from poverty, displaced peoples, economic instability, competition over shared resources, such as water and arable land. Since 1989, 97 out of 103 armed conflicts were internal, and 70% of all war casualties since World War II have been civilians, rising to more than 90% in the 1990s. Environmental issues can cause or exacerbate conflict, and on the flip side of the coin, conflict can wreak havoc with the sustainability of the environment. Recent internal conflicts highlight local environmental degradation from weapons and methods of warfare, vast tracts of farmland rendered deadly by landmines, long-term illness from products like depleted uranium, scorched earth warfare, burning oil wells in the Gulf War, and destroyed dams in the Moldavian conflict have long-term, often irreversible environmental consequences. Genuine security can only exist in a world whose resources are available to all and to both current and future generations. Kofi Annan defines it very well in his report to the Millennium Summit, sought to identify the main challenges the world faces as we enter the 21st century. The report places environmental concerns as the third pillar of human security for the United Nations' new agenda, with freedom of want, freedom of fear, and the freedom of future generations to sustain their lives on this planet. That requires rethinking resource use, not only in the developing world, but taking a hard look at reduction of consumption here in the United States and in other industrialized countries. More than 3 decades ago, conservationist Joseph Wood Crutch said, "Security depends not so much on how much you have as upon how much you can do without." Under the current system, many in the developing world have been asked to do without jobs, food, and basic necessities, while some in the West feel deprived if they don't have a second SUV. The Earth Summit in 1992 enshrined the concept of sustainable development, the ability of the current generation to meet its needs without jeopardizing the ability of future generations to sustain theirs. That development was to be achieved through equal participation by all countries and differentiated responsibility when it comes to action. Ecological sustainability can be measured by some imaginative accounting. For example, a set of numbers defining the size of our ecological footprint, whether the Earth can continue to provide what we take in food and fuel and continue to absorb what we give off in waste. We must practice sustainable consumption if we are ever to attain sustainable development. But our environmental accounting, it seems, is being done by Arthur Andersen. According to the Living Planet Report 2000, the ecological overshoot currently stands at 30%. Now, I know that's a controversial figure, but nonetheless, and most would say very, very conservative. But that's bad enough. We are ecologically way over budget, a massive overdraft for which our children and their children will pay the price. Of the 151 countries measured in the report, 75 exceeded their Earth share, while 76 fell below it. But those using more than their share accounted for only 21% of the population, 1/5 of humanity, sending the rest into disastrous ecological debt. The United States is among the top 3 overconsumers, tied with Singapore and exceeded only by the United Arab Emirates, using more than 5 times its fair share of the world's resources. This ecological inequity reflects the spectrum of inequities that underlie all concerns about security. It is unfair to place the bulk of the burden of ecological preservation on those very countries already staggering under supreme shortages of resources, education, infrastructure, and money. Those who use the lion's share of the world's resources must share with those who have less. They must share not only their resources, but their expertise and their understanding that the challenges faced in other parts of the world must be recognized as their own challenges as well. This is a new problem facing the international community, which could not be imagined in the 1940s when the UN Charter was written. The very success of our efforts to alleviate hunger and poverty and spur economic growth has resulted in the overuse of our resources and a degradation of our living environment, which in turn are undermining those same efforts. Environmental degradation threatens security across borders through pollution and depletion that harms economies, food and resource supplies, and human well-being. Environmental problems, by definition, know no boundaries. Nature was the first global monopoly. Air pollution does not stop at a factory fence, let alone at some line on a map. Water depletion does not recognize political boundaries, but, as we are all too well aware in our region, it has profound political consequences. The adage, think globally, act locally, is nowhere as apt as in environmental issues. As crucial as conservation decisions are on a global level, like other globalized initiatives, they are doomed to fail. They ignore local concerns. For instance, centrally planned dams designed to provide water or hydroelectric power to one area or nation have destroyed local communities and sparked unrest. Generalized fishing quotas, if they ignore issues such as cultural attitudes towards compliance and the effect of the regulations on local economies, are almost impossible to enforce and even can be a source of conflict among nations. Worldwide problems like global climate change, ozone depletion, and deforestation are beginning to show long-term impact all over the Earth in changing weather patterns and extinction of species, which will affect everyone on our planet. Regional but still transnational issues like scarcity and mismanagement of water, shared food stocks, and other resources deepen poverty, encourage political instability, foster mass migration of refugees, and even fuel violence. Whether it is environment, development, or security, any sustainable approach to dealing with such challenges must be a multilateral effort in which developed and developing countries participate. One of the basic objectives behind the Jordanian-Israeli peace treaty was to address several dimensions of security at one time: water, environment, energy, borders, and refugees were all negotiated at the same time within a comprehensive framework. Agreement on one encouraged agreement on the other issues. Environmental security must be viewed by the community of states as a vital global interest, but it is a paradox. It cannot exist without peaceful cooperation among states, yet that peace itself can be threatened by inequity in resources. Earlier this year, Jordan hosted a conference to discuss the environmental implications of the future Mediterranean Free Trade Zone, which seeks to promote greater economic cooperation between the European Union and countries of the southern Mediterranean. Multiple stakeholders, local and international, including representatives of the European Union, international, regional, and local NGOs, and local government officials, participated in discussions to identify and to comprehend the impact of trade on our human health, local ecosystems, and environmental habitats. The goal was to integrate the conservation and preservation agenda with the agenda of overall socioeconomic development. This balance will be absolutely critical to our future prospects for stability and peace in the region. Regional states must realize that without environmental security, we can never ensure political and economic stability. And this is, of course, no easy task. Wealth breeds indifference, while poverty breeds desperation. In the developed North, abundance of both money and natural resources insulates inhabitants from the consequences of waste. In the developing South, where the worst natural shortages occur, poverty makes survival the priority and pushes conservation to the fringes. By linking ecological concerns to the social and economic security of people, and ultimately to a reduction in human suffering, hopefully it will be possible to gain greater grassroots support for what until now has been perceived in many places as a largely elitist concern. offering the promise of making conservation relevant to the lives of a wider public. And while we are widening the definition of security to embrace the environment, we must include a constellation of related issues that are inseparably linked with it, such as population, health, economics, and government. Lasting global security requires a world that recognizes the need to resolve population issues within a development framework if prosperity and peace are to be ensured. People pay the price of population growth and resource degradation through poverty, displacement, and strained social service systems. Policymakers need to be aware that population pressures increase the probability of conflict, especially in the presence of aggravating factors like widening economic disparities, worsening environmental conditions, and dwindling natural resources. Eliminating poverty and inequality through social and economic development can contribute to solving population issues and reduce sources of conflict. Disease is another environmental issue that threatens the world's security. Even as advances in medical technology work to combat illness, other forms of human activity exacerbate its spread. Population growth coupled with poverty and urban crowding leads to the rapid spread of established diseases, even those like tuberculosis, one thought on the edge of eradication, and the rapid growth of new ones. Global climate change is starting to extend the area where tropical diseases flourish, and globalization's increased mobility increases the reach of infections to a frightening extent. Poverty decimates the health care that might combat these diseases, and the diseases decimate the productive population whose labor might help pull the country or region out of poverty. And the most shocking example, of course, is the HIV Aids epidemic. By the end of the year 2000, an estimated total of 13 million children had lost their mother or both parents to AIDS, with 40 million projected by the year 2010. According to UNAIDS and the World Health Organization, at the start of the new millennium, HIV had penetrated every country on Earth. An estimated 36.1 million people were living with HIV or AIDS, 25.3 million in sub-Saharan Africa, 50% higher than had been projected 10 years earlier. By conservative estimates, in some African countries where 15% or more of adults are infected, AIDS will kill a third to half of today's 15-year-olds. In some countries, 1 year of HIV treatment costs the equivalent of 30 years' income. The absence of affordable therapies and medicines in developing countries only exacerbates the already enormous human and economic costs of AIDS. The epidemic is expected to wipe $22 billion off the South African economy in the next 8 years, and the projected shortage of skilled workers will make it that much more difficult to recover. In some countries, the sheer amount of time workers spend attending funerals causes a 10% loss in productivity and denies new AIDS orphans the agricultural training they need to support themselves. Crisis has already reversed some of the health and development gains of recent decades in these countries, with millions of infected citizens, including shortening the average life expectancy by 15 to 20 years. The epidemic has in some countries nearly destroyed the healthcare infrastructure, with the loss of teachers, doctors, and health workers. Whole sections of society have been decimated. This breakdown has made it all the more difficult to even get those medicines that are becoming available to the people who need them. It also risks fueling social and political instability, a generation of children growing up without parents, vulnerable to exploitation and radicalization. All these consequences show how important it is not to lose sight of local community needs, even or perhaps especially in the midst of international crises. For this reason, a 1999 the White House made a statement declaring the worldwide AIDS epidemic a national security threat, the first time a disease has ever been so classified. We can only hope recognizing the links between health and security will bring more attention and resources to bear. It is a massive problem with far-reaching implications, but cost is a comparatively minor consideration. US $3 billion a year could prolong and improve the lives of millions of Africans. This seems like a massive amount until it is compared to something like the $52 billion the US alone spends on obesity, more than 17 times what would be needed to change the course of the AIDS epidemic. The economic devastation wrought by AIDS brings us to another definition of security. Essential security demands economic opportunity for all. True individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. People who are hungry and out of a job are the stuff of which dictatorships are made. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. As long as large segments of the world's population are denied participation in economic life, or even the chance to support themselves, there can never be security for them or for those who are seen or perceived as taking more than their fair share. And the solutions to economic problems need not be at the expense of environmental concerns. A creative approach can preserve two birds with one stone, as it were. Environmental protection and economic development can, if strategies embrace the idea that the use of resources by local populations is not only inevitable, but also legitimate, so long as it is ecologically sound. People's use of water and other local resources is their right, but it should be firmly linked to environment and education programs, wherever and whenever possible. Conservation and development are inextricably linked. Jordan is among the many countries that have benefited from these ideas, first in developing our national reserve networks, and later in formulating a long-term national environment strategy, the first in the Middle East. Our experience was a catalyst for establishing other programs among the Arab states and helped to promote the coordinated monitoring of regional environmental trends. At nature reserves in Dana and Wadi Rum in southern Jordan, for example, conservation efforts have integrated tourism development and revitalized local production to increase employment and income. Once inhabitants enjoy a better quality of life, they have a greater vested interest in preserving the natural beauty and the biodiversity upon which it depends. Throughout our country and in many others, nature conservation is proving an effective route to national socioeconomic development. Women, the backbone of these local communities, provide for their families through their management of natural resources. They have a stake in preserving their children's future, and thus can play an invaluable role in such conservation efforts. However, women can also be abusers of the environment. For instance, in the misuse of firewood in some areas in Africa, or in the use of chemicals in homes in more developed environments. The most successful sustainable development programs incorporate gender concerns and perspectives with education and awareness building. For instance, the World Wildlife Federation's Women in Environment program aims at integrating nature conservation and community development in areas around the national parks in Bhutan through non-formal education, alternate income-generating activities, microcredit and savings, and environmental and developmental awareness. Providing alternative livelihoods helps reduce pressure on precious natural resources. Similarly, WWF programs in Fiji promote the use and conservation of the kuta plant as a material for traditional weaving techniques, are helping both local women and the wetlands where the plant grows. The intimate involvement of local communities in planning and activities that benefit both themselves and the environment is the most effective way, perhaps the only way, to sustain both. This brings us to another sine qua non of security. Governments committed to transparency, tolerance, and participation of their people This is the only way to reconcile the seemingly contradictory concepts of security and freedom. As William Proxmire warned, power always has to be kept in check. Power exercised in secret, especially under the cloak of national security, is doubly dangerous. Countries that attempt to protect their security by denying the human rights of their people, of any people, have already lost the battle. We need to establish systems of international governance, including non-governmental organizations and transnational norms in areas like trade and global finance flows, international communications, and environmental protection standards to coordinate diverse actors and maintain commitment and facilitate fair and equitable action. Issue-oriented NGOs such as the World Conservation Union, their Global Initiative on Environment and Security, for example, illustrates one of the positive aspects of globalization. Global communication methods are increasing the ability of local groups and individuals to band together to have an international impact. Beyond global governance, national and local institutions must also be strengthened or fixed where they are broken. People must be enabled to participate in making the decisions that affect their most fundamental needs. They must be given the knowledge and the political power to set their own agendas, define their own priorities, and take action. When people, particularly women, who are absolutely pivotal in this process, are given a stake in their own future, they will take responsibility and do what needs to be done, making changes that would be impossible if imposed by some higher authority. As Kofi Annan emphasizes in his Millennium Report, the overarching challenge of our times is to make globalization mean more than bigger markets. To make a success of this great upheaval, we must learn how to govern better, and above all, how to govern better together. These interrelated elements form a new definition of security and bring into sharp relief the problems that stand in its way. So far, the world's attitude towards environmental sustainability, when one has existed at all, has been one of crisis management instead of thoughtful planning. But the crucial principles in our relations to each other, as well as to our planet itself, are balance and equity. As Al Gore put it, for civilization as a whole, the faith that is so essential to restore the balance now missing in our relationship to the earth is the faith that we do have a future. We can believe in that future and work to achieve it and preserve it, or we can whirl blindly on, behaving as if one day there will be no children to inherit our legacy. The choice is ours. Earth is in the balance. Genuine security is a multifaceted idea and must be explored by thinking across boundaries, national, ideological, cultural, and disciplinary. Without growth, poverty alleviation, political stability, and peace, development and human welfare will suffer. It is not a matter of prioritizing resource allocation. It is a new vision that all parts are one whole. This is the goal of the Sustainability Summit in Johannesburg, which will begin at the end of August. Johannesburg will build on the Earth Summit, the Population Conference, the Social Summit, the Women's Summit, etc., the summits of the last decade, to bring all the recommendations together in a new comprehensive agenda that addresses all aspects of the development process at the same time. And in the process, perhaps provide, God willing, a realistic framework for what is necessary for lasting global security. Any definition wide enough to embrace anything is no definition at all. But to be effective, I think our definition of security must include all these things. In the largest, truest sense, security is about quality of life. Ultimately, we need a more holistic and flexible definition of security, not a besieged fortress, but a safety net. Our globe's resources are shrinking even faster than globalization is shrinking our world. from life-giving water to soul-nourishing landscapes to whole species of plants and animals that may hold the secret key to some of our greatest health threats, to the whole web of biological resources that support life itself, we are destroying the very things that sustain us. And once gone, they are gone forever. We cannot create our world anew. We can only conserve what the Creator has given us. Any other course robs our children and theirs of those gifts we have received and squandered. All religions enjoin their followers to respect the deity's creation and share it with their fellow beings. The Prophet Muhammad, blessings upon him, said, "The world is green and beautiful, and God has appointed you his stewards over it." And it is worth emphasizing the concept of stewardship, which entails preservation and conservation. Some religions, especially native and Eastern traditions, are more ecocentric than others and could serve as examples of a more holistic approach. Some scientists, philosophers, and even theologians are coming to the concept of Gaia, the idea that our planet must be seen as a living organism, a host upon which we are a dependent subspecies. As things currently stand, we are parasites and will at this rate kill our host. We can, if we try, still establish a symbiotic relationship. But at the very least, we must stop and realize that warfare, in the name of religion especially, the risk of not only the combatants, but the very world itself, contradicts all that is holy. War, destroying everything in a vain attempt to preserve something, causes environmental degradation, dislocates societies, and disperses people, and creates vicious cycles of destruction, poverty, and misery. So if war is no answer, what is? Genuine security will not be achieved through confrontation, but through the ongoing ceaseless pursuit of understanding on all sides. As William Fulbright said, in the long course of history, having people who understand your thought is much greater security than another submarine. Even more important now is the effort not only to be understood, but to listen and understand others. September 11th should lead the world to realize the primary importance of cross-cultural dialogue and collaboration in order to enhance our own security by relying on each other's strength. Genuine security is not the illusory refuge of the complacent. It is a precious goal that has long been denied to the majority of Earth's inhabitants. But neither is it the result of occupations, weapons, border checks, secret tribunals, or profiling. In security considerations, national interest must be compatible with planetary interest and with the interest of future generations, whatever country they may inhabit. Ultimately, our security, even our individual survival and that of our children, is dependent not on competition, but on the cooperation of all. Amid the unprecedented disasters and escalating conflict of the past 8 months, it is more crucial than ever that we cling to humanity as the center of our every endeavor. Any other approach is a disservice to both the Earth's human inhabitants and the environments on which we all depend. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that truly inspiring speech. And now Queen Noor has graciously agreed to answer some questions, but first let me lay out the ground rules. Please come to a microphone, introduce yourself, and please ask a question. If you actually begin to deliver a lecture, I'll have to cut you off and turn to the next speaker. And with that, we have somebody at a microphone.
Hi, my name is Michael Jung. I'm a second-year Master in Public Policy student here at the Kennedy School. I'm also one of the co-chairs with Donna on the Environment and Ecology Professional Interest Council. And let me first say that she has inspired our work at the Kennedy School just as much as your speech has inspired all of us here today. You mentioned the importance of international governance in your speech. And I've noted that there is a movement underway for a call for improved national governance, led especially by the United States in the run-up to the Johannesburg summit. I'd like to ask you if you are sympathetic to such concerns that call for improved legal system, better financial accountability, and lessened corruption, or if you have any experience in your career that suggests that these are either possible or difficult calls to adhere to.
Well, I'm very happy that the United States is emphasizing the importance of governance based on those principles, as I think we all, especially those of us from a developing world perspective, recognize how important it is that, again, there be a mutual, if you will, support system between developed and developing countries in order to facilitate and encourage and motivate that kind of the kind of reform that those principles will require in so many parts of the world. In my own experience, on one hand, yes, those are enormous challenges, and I'm not sure how much will be accomplished before Johannesburg, but those are fundamental principles upon what we hope can begin to be accomplished at Johannesburg will depend. But in my own work, from the grassroots level on up to more community, national and even regional levels, I've seen at the grassroots where enormous progress can be made, enormous energy unleashed, positive and constructive energy, confidence, and therefore security, if you will, sense of security, by ensuring that there is participatory decision-making processes that rely upon transparency, that rely upon the engagement of men and women in, as I mentioned in my remarks, assuming responsibility for the development process, and therefore investing themselves in a process that they will protect and guard and sacrifice for if necessary to ensure its success. It is very hard to take that and translate it on a larger scale in many parts of the world, and we're struggling with that in our part of the world. But increasing numbers, I think, of people are recognizing that those are principles that have to be our goals, and that whether it's conservation and development or any other aspect of security that I've mentioned, it can only derive from good governance and freedom and societies that are just, and relationships between societies and nations that are based on justice, on mutual respect and cooperation. So we cross our fingers, pray to God, and each and every one of us can make efforts in our own individual ways as well as collectively, and there are many here in this part of the world who are doing that, in this institution who are contributing to those processes in other parts of the world.
Thank you.
We have a question on this side.
My name is Nava Ashraf. I'm a PhD candidate in economics, and I'm originally from Iran. I wanted to ask you, based on your experience, what leads people of a country to religious fanaticism? Is it economic inequality? Is it the theory of rising expectations? Is it rapid modernization? What, from what you've seen being in the region, leads people to extremism?
Well, you've just mentioned key factors in that process. I actually, before I reached the Arab world, the land of my ancestors, I worked in Iran, and on a urban planning project that gave me wonderful access to, or exposure to, a period in Iran just prior to the revolution when the seeds of frustration and resentment and well, the seeds of what I was not aware until later would develop, certainly. But there you saw a you had a sense, and again, I'm no expert on Iran, but of what I've seen in other societies, including in the Arab world, which was an increasing, if you will, polarization of society, an increasing sense of an inequitable distribution of resources, or certainly the perception of inequity in the distribution of resources, access to opportunities, and so it's not just poverty, but it's also the sense that that opportunity is limited or denied to different sectors of society. Whether it's religious fanaticism or extremism that can take many other forms, it breeds in environments in which people feel they have no other hope, no other frame of reference for locating themselves in the world around them, and nothing else to hold on to that gives them some sense of, some anchor, if you will. That is why Johannesburg is terribly important, for example. That's why the subject of the meetings over this past week, I think, are so important to view. That subject is important to view as an integrated whole, not just of environmental issues, but of political security issues, social security issues, of peace we see today in different parts of the Middle East and elsewhere, how these issues come together. And there is no single answer or single reason why people are driven or are drawn to extremes, and especially to such violent extremes. But there are many, many reasons that are all interrelated in the subject that I've tried to cover today, and we have to look at those in a holistic fashion, and hopefully Johannesburg will succeed. It's very idealistic of me to say that, I know, but in, as I said, providing some sort of framework that we can build on for an integrated framework, if you will, that looks at global security and at every level, from the micro level to the macro.
Thank you.
You've been waiting over here.
My name is Karen Morag, and I'm from Jerusalem, Israel. I'm a mid-career student. Your Majesty, last Saturday we had the opportunity to see at Larry King's program a tape with the late King Hussein and late Prime Minister Rabin, and I think that no feelings, we couldn't express no feelings of how much we miss both of them. Late King Hussein was truly admired and loved by the Israelis people, and we sincerely appreciated his efforts to bring peace to the region. I apologize that my question won't be in an environmental issue, but in your opinion, what should be the solution to the Palestinian refugee problem? And how do you see 10 years from now Israel and Jordan's relations?
Well, and this is not answering directly perhaps, but you did preface it with the program, the taping of the interview that had combined actually Yitzhak Rabin, Yasser Arafat, and my husband, at a time in which we recognized we were facing enormous challenges, but at the same time it was with a sense of more than just a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, and a sense of hope. And when Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated, Arabs wept throughout the Arab world, something that people should remember today. And so many, so at that time, a majority of people and populations throughout our region supported the principle of peace, and a peace that they recognized would entail sacrifices, compromise, but a peace that they accepted was in the interests of all, that all would benefit from, could contribute towards. And I believe that, again, that if we can return to a focus on a vision that will provide justice, security, sense of confidence, and ultimately that will lead towards the kind of cooperation that was just beginning to develop after Oslo and the Jordanian-Israeli treaties, in which Palestinians and Israelis and Jordanians and others were coming together on an individual basis, institutionally and otherwise, and not only beginning a number of important cooperative projects and others, but also breaking through so many of the psychological and emotional barriers that had divided them. I think that I pray to God that we can still build on the foundations of what we experienced then, moving into the future once we have moved beyond the impasse that and the stalemate that we've been facing now for this recent period. But it is in that context that Palestinian refugees, or the people of Palestine and the people of Israel and the people of the other Arab countries, it is only in the context of that kind of collaborative, mutually respectful and beneficial approach that there will be any security and peace for anyone.
A question up here and then over here.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Wilmot. I'm a first year here at the Kennedy School. My question for you is that, assuming that America is responsible for a great deal of dangerous overconsumption, I wonder if you might be able to recommend what environmental leaders in this country might do to help people in America rethink economic behaviors.
I think one of the most important things, I may be being naive, but I think just communicating the information, the facts and figures that exist. I'm a board member of the World Wildlife Fund, a patron of the World Conservation Union, and an honorary president of something called the BirdLife International, and involved also with a few other organizations that I brought together when we had the World Conservation Congress meeting in Jordan in the fall of 2000. And we sat together at a small table because these were the key international organizations, and it's a relatively small number that manage an enormous network of local and regional and international efforts. And we were looking at Johannesburg and trying to figure out how we could convey the information that each and every one of our organizations had in very technical and scientific studies, and you know, a great deal of expertise exists and a great deal of knowledge exists, but it's not getting out to people in a way in which an average person, even like myself, who is not a scientist, can understand and can relate to their own lives. So I personally think that we all have a responsibility to try, and perhaps that was the case over this past week with many of the distinguished speakers you've had, that some of that information is now hopefully going to be transmitted, especially at Johannesburg, in a way that is comprehensible to people at different levels of understanding, and that they can use then to influence their decision makers and policymakers in different countries around the world to act in their own, as I said, planetary interest and the interests of their own individual nations as well as the larger world. So I would like to see that. I would like to see us all contributing to disseminating information that can have much more of an impact.
I think we have time for two more questions. There's one here and then one here.
My name is Franz Johansson. I'm a second year at the business school. And my question to you is the issue of how do you see integrating the issue of population growth into sustainable development in a time when the issue of reproductive rights is so polarized?
Well, it's a good question, and how do I see it? You didn't ask me actually for a solution, so I can't say that I... How do I see it? I see it as an enormous challenge for some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. There are a variety of different approaches that I've seen used in different societies where traditionally this has been a very controversial or even taboo subject. But in fact, when looked at I don't want to use the word creative as if it's not entirely, as if one is trying to get around something, but if looked at flexibly, and in our case, in the Arab Muslim world, drawing upon Islamic teachings and other resources at our disposal. In fact, we found ways of addressing some of these issues not in the conventional birth control and in the sort of more oppressive or dictatorial, if you will, reproductive health strategies, but in fact, we began to look at birth spacing and looking at the health of the mother and the family and of her children. That's just one tiny example of one of the directions that we were able to pursue that actually resulted in very intangible results. On the other hand, the other approach that has been incredibly effective, of course, is through just general education and improving the living standards of people. And I have seen in very, very poor areas of the country that I've focused on over the last 10, 15 years, a lowering of the birth rate when women were given better access to better educational facilities, were also enabled to develop roles as income earners in the communities and as decision makers in their communities as well. So I'm approaching it from a slightly different angle, but from my own experience, there are different ways that within the traditions of a community and looking at helping them to understand the realistic, pragmatic choices in front of them, you actually can make a great deal of progress without confronting and opposing, if you will, traditions and other cultural norms that may be not yet convinced.
Last question.
Hello, my name is Mugedul, and I'm a first-year Master of Public Administration International Development student here at Kennedy School, and I'm also a graduate of United World College of Pacific, so long-time admirer of yours. My question is with regards to an issue that you have mentioned a number of times tonight, that is global environmental governance. Given the local, regional, and global constraints, and the complexity of issues we are facing, and almost the ad hoc nature of the organizations, the institutions we depend on solving them, what kind of global environmental architecture do you envisage if we are ever going to achieve cooperation?
Well, that's a good question. And again, maybe I'm being cowardly, but I would go back to Johannesburg, to our hopes for Johannesburg. I think the architecture is going to have to come out of all the different stakeholders and all the different organizations. And the beauty of the UN summits of the past decade has been bringing together public decision makers, non-governmental organizations, individuals, activists, bringing the entire spectrum of our societies together to discuss these issues and to participate in identifying the critical challenges and priorities for addressing them. And I would say that we're going to have to depend on taking that process now some steps further and making more concrete the integration of the basic recommendations of all the different conferences over the past decade, which reinforced many of the same fundamental principles upon which sustainable development went, and whatever area you were looking at, whether it was children or women or social development conference, environment, human rights, all of them, there were basic principles that were common to all the final recommendations from these different conferences. That's why Johannesburg has the great potential now to be able to start to weave that together and provide a more concrete framework for us to work with. And I hope and pray it will. But it has to be, again, by working at all levels simultaneously. This can't be a top-down process. It has to be one the most successful development I've ever seen anywhere is one that begins at the grassroots that is supported and facilitated by different levels up to the top, but that begins with and ultimately has to end with success at the grassroots, with the responsibility being assumed by people at the grassroots level.